Please turn to page 145 for our informative explanatory writing lessons. On the cover of this chapter page, you will see 2 boxes with research and how important it is for you to weave this type of writing throughout all your core subjects. First, let's start with Doug Reeves. He looked at schools that had 90% poverty, 90% second language learners, and yet they hit the 90th percentile in standardized testing. How in the world did these schools do this? And here's the critical piece. These were not cookie cutter schools. All these schools looked a little bit differently, but what he was able to do was identify certain traits they had in common. What Doug Reeves found was writing across the curriculum is going to increase achievement levels. Students will understand their content and improve their writing greatly if they write about what they're learning in all their core subjects. So notice in his research, what were students doing? They were writing in a variety of subjects, and the only way to do that is to write throughout your core. Also, he had performance assessment. The predominant method of assessment is in performance. Therefore, students' understanding of their subject through their writing out what they know, using that as a performance assessment, is also shown that you will increase their achievement levels if you have this as part of your instructional program. Collaborations. Teachers using real student work to focus on their discussion, to effectively identify what strengths, weaknesses the students had so that could guide them in their instruction when they went back to the classroom. Also, there was a focus, and this is the one that I think is so critical. Teachers in these schools did not try to do it all. So let's talk about this, because this one piece here about trying to do it all, that is the frustration, I think, of most teachers, is we have so much we have to do and there just isn't enough time. Writing across the curriculum will be a time saver. Instead of having separate instructional times for writing, you will embed that writing in your science, in your social studies, in your language arts time, your math time, all throughout your instructional day. As we go into this chapter for informative explanatory writing, what you will find is we're not going to just look at here's a piece of informational writing, here's how you put it together. I'm also going to show you how to fit it into your instructional day, how to pull the content and writing together. So you truly will be focusing on your kids understanding the content as well as writing about it and becoming better writers. Finally, let's look at the last piece of research here to really motivate us to want to integrate informational writing into our core subjects. From the research done by Walker and Kirpus. When content area teachers incorporate writing into all areas of the curriculum, students benefit in 3 ways. And this is what's key. 1, they have a resource for better understanding of the content. What do we want our students to do? We want them to understand the content. And through this research, they're showing us when you write about what you're learning, you will understand and you will hold on to that information at a higher rate. Also, number 2, your students will practice a technique which aids retention. So many times when our students are learning information, a week later, they have forgotten everything that we taught them, and it becomes very frustrating. Imagine students at the end of the school year being able to tell you about information they learned in science and social studies, language arts, math. This technique will increase that retention rate. And finally, your third key to writing across the curriculum is your students will write better. Writing just in one separate part of the day and not connected to what they're learning about, most children are not going to show those skills cross over to all the core subjects. Through this writing process that I'm going to show you, you will also increase your vocabulary levels of your students so they are able to use robust, sophisticated language and the content vocabulary because you are pulling writing into all these core areas. Let's now look at our stages of writing. What are your students expected to do at your grade levels when it comes to informative explanatory writing? In the top section of page 146 are the 2nd grade Common Core state standards for informative explanatory text and 3rd grade standards. The specific and detailed of what your children should be learning during your school year have been identified in that top section. On that same page and the following page are my stages of writing to show you the organizers and an at-a-glance look at what you would be teaching your students. First of all, notice second grade, you will be working in stages 3 through 6, and third grade, you could be working in stages 3 through 8. Stages 3 and 4 are our crossover stages. Actually, stages 3 and 4 was at the end of the first grade level. I've included those stages here only if your students need to begin with understanding what a topic sentence is by using the SS light bulb secret formula. This is a very temporary lesson if you need to do that. The next stage is stage 4. In the stage 4, this is only for students who still are working on organizing their details. They still need to understand how to sequence or how to categorize, but they can only do that one detail at a time. They can't look at all of them together. These are students that are still having those organizational issues, and you don't want to jump to adding organizers. So what do I have at this stage? We have our topic sentence on the top. We have our details in the middle. And the details in the middle, these are one at a time. We are adding each one of these detail boxes. And finally at the bottom, we have our conclusion. Again, why do I use this? Only for students who need to focus on one detail at a time. If I started introducing graphic organizers to them, they would be lost because they still have difficulty just organizing their details one after the other. The next stage is stage 5. This is when we introduce our graphic organizers. And when we introduce our graphic organizers, what you need to be conscious of is we are only introducing categories and sequencing. That is it at stage 5. Your students will have the topic sentence and the conclusion. Notice that in the categories. Up on the top was our topic sentence, down on the bottom was the conclusion. Over here in our sequence, topic sentence, conclusion. What's different is the bodies. These are highly occurring organizers. Many times how writing is organized, either in categories or in a sequence when it comes to the details. Although stage 4 includes categories or sequencing of details, they're just looking at each detail one at a time. In stage 5, they are now being introduced to text structures where they are now looking at, oh, all that information can be grouped together. It can take the whole. For instance, here's a plant, and then a plant needs many different things to survive. So those are the parts, all the different things they need to survive. Oh, I can sort that information into categories. Or they could look at all their details and know, egg, caterpillar, chrysalis, butterfly. Oh, those are details, but they have to be in a specific order. I need to sequence them on my sequencing organizer. So again, this is not just details, but taking the details and identifying the text structure, categories, or sequencing in order to organize them. Once they get pretty good at that text structure, then we move to our stage 6, which is a description. Notice the organizer still has a top and the bottom for the topic and the conclusion, yet this is a little different because our topic, sentence, and conclusion in a description is a definition. And the body is the description organizer, where they need to draw a picture, label the parts, describe them, and tell the function of the parts. This is the next type of text structure that your students will start to understand and have to learn by looking at all of the details and saying, now should I categorize them, sequence them, or should this be a description? So when we look at stage 5 and we look at stage 6, what we are doing is trying to master stage 5. Then when we have stage 6, it's where we're adding that text structure of description to sequencing and categories. Now they have those 3 to choose from to organize their information in a paragraph. Let's go to the final stages, stages 7 and stages 8. Again, we are still looking here at the categories, and we're also looking at the sequencing. The difference is we're going to add more to those organizers. We're going to have a hook on each one and a snappy ending. And we're also going to expand the detail sentences in these different organizers. After our students have learned how to expand their detailed sentences, begin with hooks, end with snappy endings, then we can include the description organizer with a hook and a snappy ending and expanded detailed sentences. So what we're looking at is making the writing more sophisticated, adding more rigor to our writing at these two levels within these same three organizers. Where ultimately by the end of stage 8, we have hooks to hook in our reader, we have our topic sentence, we have our organizers selected to organize the details and to write sophisticated sentences in which we expand and develop more ideas, ending with a conclusion and a snappy ending. And the snappy ending is make this information matter. Why was it so important? Let's go to the next page so we can take all of this information and try to put it together into your instructional day, week, year. Please turn to page 148, 149. We've looked at the research. We know incorporating informative explanatory writing within all our core subjects is critical for our students' success, and it will help you, the teacher, fit everything into your instructional day. We also went over my stages of writing so you understand what your students need to write according to the Common Core state standards. The next question that most teachers have at this point is, I know I need to teach this informational writing. I understand what the writing should look like. I've seen the Common Core, the stages of writing, but how in the world do I fit all this in? Because, and here's one of the key reasons why this becomes so difficult. How in the world can students write about the content all the time unless they know the content really well? You can't write about something unless you know it. And that's where it becomes very troubling and puzzling. How are you going to fit writing in unless your kids know this? So here is a solution that I've created so that you can teach your content as well as integrate writing throughout your science, your social studies, language arts, all your core subjects. Let's take a look at the format I created in order to incorporate writing throughout your core subjects. Look at both page 148 and 149 together. What I want you to see is where it says no knowledge and knowledge. When we're looking at science and social studies primarily, what I've found is that when I begin, my students typically have very little or maybe no knowledge. As we progress in our unit of study, they start developing knowledge. These 2 pages are showing you these are activities you can use with your students to incorporate writing as well as to make sure that they stay at grade level in the content, whether they have very little or no knowledge, or they now have the knowledge of that particular unit of study. Let's look at what these different activities are. The first one is lecture notes. Lecture notes is an activity where your students are going to have a blank piece of paper, and so are you, and you will be the giver of the information. So the teacher is going to give the information to the students. And as the teacher is giving the information to the students and the teacher together are making a graphic organizer. So you would have a blank piece of paper on a document viewer or a big piece of butcher paper up on your board, and you're making a graphic organizer embedded with keywords and simple icons using the text structure with a topic sentence, the body with the details, and the conclusion, but you are giving the information because the kids don't have it. So in this sense, the teacher is giving the information, recording it on the organizer, the students are recording it as well. What is being put on this information is the big idea of your unit of study. So when you're starting off a unit of study and you know, my kids may not know a lot about volcanoes, so I'm going to give them a basic background of what volcanoes are before we go to read about it. So they have enough background information When we read, they can start to understand and comprehend at higher levels. So they need that background, but I also need them to write. So I give them the information, we record it on the chart, and here's what's really exciting about lecture notes. Every time I go to record the information on the chart, I then will stop and I will rehearse this information so that it turns into sentences and it sounds like writing. And I will also include hand motions to guide me through that information. And the students are going to rehearse with me. So I will give them some information about our subject that we're going to study, record it on the organizer, then we will go through and orally rehearse the information so it sounds like writing, using hand motions as well to guide us through. Every time I give information, we orally rehearse it. I then have my students turn to each other and practice. Go through your notes and reread the notes to your buddy. I walk around and I listen. Can they say this information that we've put on our notes so far on their own with their buddy? If not, I go back and I'm going to then repeat this information again. Then the children will orally rehearse. I come back and I add more information. What's the goal of lecture notes? The goal is to give them important information that's critical for their background, their schema, as well as developing language, vocabulary, so that they can turn it into writing. And ultimately, this does turn into writing. At the end of this lesson, which could take 1 or several days to fill in, my students will orally rehearse it and then write it out. Let's go to our next activity. This is content diagrams. So notice under No Knowledge, I have lecture notes or content diagrams to choose from. The reason why I choose content diagrams is when I know that my students need content or topical vocabulary. One of the reasons why I use a content vocabulary diagram is just for that reason, is if I know that when I'm heading into my unit of study, my students may not know much of the vocabulary that's specific to the content, I may do a diagram. And on this diagram, I would draw a picture of the subject that we're learning about, and in this case, volcanoes. So together, the students and I draw a picture. Then we label with the vocabulary. We'll label the parts and tell the function of the parts. Again, the students are going to orally rehearse this and then they will end up writing this out. Quickly, now that I've overviewed these 2 activities when your students don't have enough background, lecture notes or content vocabulary diagrams, let me also point out the lecture notes will have information using the sequencing or categories organizer for the body. While the content vocabulary diagrams, that is the description organizer. So notice I'm using the organizers that I've told you about already, our text structures, categories, sequencing, and description, but I'm the giver of the information. So the students now are using these organizers and being exposed to them. I don't have to wait until I do a writing lesson to introduce these organizers. They're introduced right from the start using these 2 activities. Once your students are well into a unit of study and they know the information pretty well, then you will want to look at page 149 because they're more at a thinking level. This top activity is when students are going to analyze the information. That means they know enough about the content where they can take the content and they can do one of these 3 things. They can show change using cause and effect. Or they could compare 2 or more things or contrast 2 or more things. Notice these are our analysis organizers. Compare, contrast, or cause and effect. In this specific example, this happened to be a contrast showing the differences between frogs and toads. So when these students were well into this unit of study about amphibians, what happened was they took frogs and toads and they showed their differences. They were analyzing the information to show their differences to explain why they survive differently. That's a higher level of thinking, and that can't be done unless you know the information really well. So when the students know the information, what do? We could use cause and effect, compare, or contrast. I'm going to put a star here because this is highly scaffolded and guided by the teacher. The students can eventually write this out, but you're helping them through this organizer. Remember, in the writing, we want your students to be proficient at categories, sequencing, and description. But we still want them thinking and exposed to these analysis organizers, cause and effect, compare, contrast. Here is a fabulous place to do that. So you now have the deep level thinking and also exposing them to those text structures. Right below it, on the bottom half of this same page, what you will see is the writing lessons. And that is where the students will have a graphic organizer and they will walk through and fill it out with information that they know, and then finally write it out. And below it, you're going to see a picture of a cover of a book. Then you're going to see a sample of the inside of the book. And what it basically is once your students know most of the information, and in this case, this was about a unit on spiders, on arachnids. Once they learned all about spiders, then they started to brainstorm. And we'll talk about brainstorming when we get into our lessons. But the students would brainstorm all the information they had learned about spiders. After brainstorming, then they wrote many different paragraphs where they would plan out their brainstorm information on different organizers, writing out different paragraphs or multiple paragraphs, and finally publishing them together in a book. So notice, this book called Spiders had many different chapters. There was a chapter that was a description of the spider. Also notice that we use that description organizer inside the book so that they labeled pictures in the book. Different types of graphics need to be in these books because that's what your standards are asking for. So these published pieces of writing going from brainstorming, organizers, publishing to putting together in a book are also an activity that you will want to include in your instructional day. That's an overview of the different types of activities that you can teach all year long, regardless of whether your students know the information or don't know the information. You can still integrate writing. The following videos will be detailed lessons where I will walk you through specific steps for lecture notes, content diagrams, for the analysis types of deep thinking activities, and I will also go through stages 3 through 8 of informative explanatory writing. Every one of these activities should begin with blank paper. I know I have the organizers in here. We went through all of them. For your students to have the best impact in their learning is have them start with blank paper and then build the organizers there. Why is that critical? Because now they have to think. They're not filling in when they make an organizer. They will retain the information and they can independently, once they learn the steps of the lessons, they can independently write on their own. That's our whole goal here. Not Xeroxing off organizers for them to fill in, but for them to understand cognitively how to make an organizer, how to take all their information, put it together so it makes sense and the reader will understand what they're writing about, and then ultimately publish those pieces of writing. So let's get to work. We're going to start off with our lecture notes, go to content diagrams, deep analysis, and finally the stages of writing. Let's look at those detailed lessons.